live.
Cool. Hey all, good morning. Welcome to Building Life and Time's Editorial and Current State of Journalism. I'm Rebecca. I'm the Community Engagement Editor here at Life and Time. I'm here with the Life and Time team today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves just because they can do it better than I can. Antonio, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. That first 5 seconds of going live anywhere is always like the scariest moment. I feel like I see like the abyss of my soul every time we go live in that first 5 seconds. Like, are we live?
And you have to confront yourself on the stream. That really, it feels different to me.
Yeah, and you're just like, for like 5 seconds. Anyways, hey everybody, I'm Antonio Diaz. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Life and Time, and this is the first webinar that is basically on ourselves, so I apologize in advance if this becomes a disaster, but I'm here with the rest of the team here. Steph, Ferrari, do you want to kind of kick things off? Where you dispatching from?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Florence, Italy. That's where I am at the moment. And I am the senior editor for Life and Time. I've been doing this with Antonio for a lot of years. How many? 5, 6, something like that.
A lot of years.
Yeah, and yeah, a lot of years, a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of stories, a lot of ink spilled. But yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation and basically hang out with my buddies for the next hour. And on that note, Gia?
And you're tuning in from Florence, Italy, which I love to say now that we have a bureau chief in Florence, Italy. Really, it's just you.
You know, it's a bureau chief that's a new title that I'm not sure if I can wear it well. Here they probably call me like a priory or something. That seems to be like or minister. I was walking around the airport last week, and they call the health department here the Ministry of Health, which sounds so much cooler,
fancier.
Yeah.
So is Anthony Fauci the Minister of Health right now in the U.S.?
I think he could probably assume that title, and maybe we should get him like a robe or something. I feel like there's got to be a better outfit. Yeah.
I mean, Antonio, you'd be the Minister of Life and Time then. You have to get a robe too if we're on ministers.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that, but
instead of the matching eyewear.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Gia.
But I want to introduce. I want to throw it over to Gia Hughes, who's our illustrious my other editorial half.
I'm Gia. I'm the associate editor of Life and Time. I've been editing the grammatical side of things here since its founding, I guess, right, Antonio?
For a very long time. Yeah, I'm excited to have you here because no one really gets to see your face. This is like the first time that we're showing who Gia Hughes is at Life and Time, because everybody just sees like your Google Doc comments.
Yeah. So true. She's the wizard.
Yeah. Well. Hi everyone.
Cool. Yeah, let's get into it. We have a lot to cover. Sorry, let me just fix my camera, make sure you don't start shaking in the middle of this thing. So kind of just starting off, we just put out Reboot. Hopefully everyone who's watching right now has gotten their copy of Reboot, or it's on the way. We started to see an article for publishing online. If you're not a member yet, Reboot is an incredible issue. We're incredibly proud of what you put out with this one. They are journalists from 17 different countries, I believe, maybe higher. It's a global issue. We found stories from around the world. We're incredibly proud of what we're able to put out in this paper. Hopefully you guys have been reading it as we're publishing online or in the paper. So just kind of start out, kind of talk about how this came together. Obviously it's a bit of departure from like past Life and Time coverage. So it's kind of starting from theme to gathering pitches, to editing process. If anyone wants to chime in on just kind of what the process of Reboot was like.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about sort of how editorial typically is created, and the process that we usually adhere to, and how that sort of funneled into what Reboot became. But I think probably it's got to be at least 5 years ago that we were doing a print magazine, and it was quarterly. And in order to sort of help us define the types of stories that we were looking for, we themed each of those issues. Our editorial online was always just sort of whatever came in, whatever was of interest, anything that was evergreen or more topical, especially because anything that goes into print definitely has to be on the more evergreen side. But in order to sort of help us build some parameters and decide what we wanted to build a cohesive issue, we started theming those quarterly print magazines, which was really fun. And it also helped, I think, for journalists and contributors to sort of wrap their heads around an idea and what they wanted to pitch. And so we've been doing that and using that structure for a long time. And when we resurrected print last year as a newspaper, and rather than a print magazine, which we discontinued in, I think, 2000.
3 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. We resurrected that sort of idea, which we had been sort of loosely still using online. But the themes in the past, they've evolved a lot. I mean, we've experimented with a lot of different kinds of themes. In print, we did things like that were a little bit more esoteric or more emotion driven, like relationships, or we did an issue on nostalgia. So you can see how those words are so evocative, and would sort of immediately, signal to contributors what we might be looking for. And it can, we tried to really leave those themes open-ended so that people can come in with something that's very specific, or be, a little bit more almost back into the theme where they maybe have an idea and we're like, okay, well, how can we kind of back that into this idea? And then we've experimented with things that are like super specific. Like we did an issue on pizza, which I stand by as still being really a fun way to handle it. But we got some great stories about that. But yeah, so that's sort of how we came to this. And this year it has been, as any journalist in any and anyone in the world in any industry right now is dealing with new and interesting challenges. And I think trying to anticipate what stories are going to look like in 3 months or what's going to be relevant in 3 months, it was really challenging. We kicked off this year with the extinction issue, which I think we were all extremely proud of. It was a little heavy in terms of, they were very serious stories, and it released in March, and it was like the perfect storm of that and COVID. And so we said, okay, let's do something a little bit lighter. And then we did Home, an at-home issue over the summer, which was a little bit more practical, I think. And then it was just sort of, we need to strike the balance. And I think that we're all feeling that across the board, so many things are getting this year has been a reset button. And I think that that's at least where the idea of Reboot came from, was this idea of like, we're sort of hitting reset across the board. And what does that look like when it comes to food and food systems?
Kind of jumping off of that there, I kind of want to get into like what makes a Life in Time story. Like when someone pitches Life in Time, like what are you looking for? We're like, this is a story that we are going to tell, the story that we want to tell, this is a voice we want to amplify. What makes a story for Life in Time? Like what are you looking for in a pitch?
I think that's constantly evolving, and even with this issue, like it's a reboot. Like a lot of the stories are about how do we rethink food systems, food ways, and our society. But it was also kind of a reboot of Life in Time to kind of address that question of like, what are the type of stories that we're looking for? And we never want to become content into what we're publishing or the type of stories. I think culture, society, everything that we face is so organic and fluid that we as journalists need to be flexible and be fluid. And at the end of the day, we have to document what is happening around us and how do we address that. What Life in Time was last year, or even at the very beginning, it's like night and day to what it is today, because our society, our culture, we are in such a heightened sense of reality that our content needs to address what is happening as well. And um, I think now more than ever, we have to be looking at um, how do stories around the world, how do they all kind of connect and relate to each other? And we're very much adamant about creating an ecosystem that highlights global issues and through the lens of food. But at the end of the day, like, we're using food as like a Trojan horse, right? At the end of the day, we're wanting to cover and to highlight these issues around the world through the lens of food. And we love food, but at the end of the day, we want to inform and provide context around what is happening around us and make sense of it. Um, so the type of stories that we're looking for is, how do these global issues that impact humanity, how can we inform readers about these problems and these issues through something that is tangible and understandable, like food? Food is the one thing we all have in common. So can we inform and talk about climate change? Can we talk about racial oppression or immigration or social justice, politics? These are all issues that one way or another are going to have a connection back to food. Every single thing that plagues humanity has a connection back to food. And those are the type of stories that we're looking for. Like, how does a story in Argentina or in Kenya, Africa, of what they're facing, can we find any sort of compelling points to, or not compelling points, but can we draw any sort of parallels to what we're facing and find some commonality of what they're facing and what we're facing, and hopefully share resources and information. Um, and like, I know, like, I'm diving into more into this idea of like what is global transnational journalism, but, and feel free to jump in here anytime, Steph and Gia. But we're at a point now where mainstream media and journalism is starting to become more isolated, insular within its own borders than it ever has before, when it should be the complete opposite, because we're all facing the same threats. And that's the point that we're trying to make. We're all facing now climate change. We're all facing COVID. We're all facing nationalism and, oppression, racial oppression, and food apartheid. These are all issues that are not just happening within the borders of the U.S. or in Europe. It's happening all over. So how can we draw those ideas together and kind of connect the dots, if that makes sense? I mean, what do you think, Steph?
I feel like you've kind of led into onto my next question here, is just kind of, we say we're not only transnational journalism but also solution based, and I just kind of want you guys to speak to, like, what does it mean to be solution based journalism? Like, why is that important right now? Like, why is that something that we are so, like, ardently pursuing in our stories?
Well, I think, that question to me is always like, your friend calls you and they they tell you 15 reasons they don't want to go to the dinner at the restaurant that you picked that night, but they don't have an idea of where they want to go to dinner. So, it's like you come to the table with a problem, you really need to come with an option for a solution as well. I think for us, the goal when it comes to solutions-based journalism is, if we're going to present an issue, we also want to present potential solutions. And of course, that's not our opinion. That's us going out and finding those problems, and then doing the diligence and the work to find the people that are trying to solve the problem. Whether that's within the economic space or I mean, certainly COVID has provided extremely fertile ground for us to be going down that path. But agricultural issues, things like that. So if we're going to present an issue, it's really important for us to talk to not just, the boots on the ground, because often if you talk to a farmer, you're going to get the context of the problem. And unfortunately, a lot of times that farmer, or, I'm using the example of the farmer, but there's, anytime the subject is usually very preoccupied with trying to do the thing, they're trying to do the day-to-day work, keep their farm open, keep their, or keep their farm producing, keep their restaurant open. They don't necessarily have the time to go out and find the solution. So not only are we covering their story, but, hopefully we go out, we find experts, we find people that are doing the work so that we can present a holistic story that's not just, well, what are we going to do now? It's trying to provide the support, the resources, and make the connections. I mean, I think to me, Life Thyme has always been about community building, and that's why this sort of more global perspective is really was a sort of natural thing for us, because whether we were publishing recipes a few years ago or like personal reflections, we still tried to get those from all over the world, because at the end of the day, what we always wanted to do was connect human beings, and to do that through food. And maybe it was a more sort of celebratory, lighter fare kind of way of doing it, but by the time we got to this issue, we already had a global community of contributors, because we had really tried to construct that and build that. Encouraged by, when we publish these stories, is somebody that we cover coming back to us and saying, hey, we were approached by so-and-so and they helped us, or they helped us get over this hurdle, or they pointed us in the right direction, or we made this connection that's gonna, be of use to us in some way, because that's what we want to do, is provide something of value to the reader, to the subjects, to everyone within the community, including the journalists that are doing the work. So I think it's solutions based in its entirety. It's a holistic approach, I think.
So kind of about how global we are and like how our stories are coming from around the world. There's a lot of like fact checking and editing, like balancing tone, and like you want to amplify the voice of a writer while making sure like it's all factual. Like we have a responsibility to like tell these stories. Can you kind of talk about what that process is like, of just like fact checking these stories, like balancing the writer's voice with the Life Thyme voice, and like that responsibility as an outlet?
I can speak to that. So the Life Thyme voice is the writer's voice, and so we're always very conscious to make sure we preserve the writer's voice as much as possible, while still being grammatically accurate. I mean, beyond accurate, just grammatically sound. So in terms of the fact-checking process, that's anything from cross-referencing, checking all references, sometimes reaching out to experts on things just to make sure that we're having, that we have a holistic view of what's being presented. To speak to the last question, we want to make sure we're constructive, not just critical. And so that's part of our fact-checking process. We don't want to provide just one side of information. It's important as journalists to provide a holistic view of everything. For a recent story, for example, we could reach out to certain professors to make sure that we're being accurate with what we're presenting. I would hate to put something out there that only contributes to a negative discourse, rather than presenting something constructive. And in terms of tone and all that, part of that has to do with the grammar, which is my fun expertise here. So I'm constantly checking for updates on what the newest, grammatical things are, which is a fun, nerdy thing that I do constantly. A fun way to keep up with all that is through AP Stylebook's Twitter. Randomly enough, they constantly post. Yes. It's super nerdy if you're into grammar stuff, but they're constantly updating their style book, and they usually, my nerd is really showing, but they usually share these things in a way that is current, like with all this political discourse currently. They're constantly updating certain grammatical things for writers to use.
What are some examples that have been updated, like in the last, like this year, like in the last couple of months?
I'll look some up. Let's see. Let's play a fun game because they are constantly doing this. And
so are you just like
this by the way is what Gia and I are typically doing at 2, 3 in the morning when we're in the middle of this cycle. Of course, now we're on vastly different time zones, but yeah, there's a whole lot of nerd.
I just imagine the two of you
going down when.
I just imagine the two of you part of like some sort of secret society of grammar nerds that you guys are just like sharing tidbits and insights of like, now the comma goes here and the comma goes there. Like what?
Yeah, that's what the robes are for.
We have some type of like Illuminati for grammar, like punctuation.
Oh my god.
Gia is definitely the grandmaster of grammar and punctuation.
Do you need a robe too then?
Yeah.
I think we're all getting robes at the end of this. That's the takeaway here. It's that Life and Time will now be in robes.
Wait, because does that make us like eligible for Hogwarts? I feel like there's like a Harry Potter.
Next call, we're all going to be in robes.
Yeah. So here's one when you're speaking about political parties when writing. So for the U.S. political party, capitalize Democrat and Democratic in references to the Democratic Party, capital D, capital P, or its members. Lowercase in generic uses. For example, he champions the society of a democratic society. So, sorry, he champions the values of a democratic society. So you use lowercase the D in democratic there. This is the nerdy stuff that I keep up on, so I can keep Life and Time grammar up to date. It goes deep. But anyways, follow AP Style Book for fun. And so over the years, I have compiled a Life and Time style book of our own. So we primarily use AP as a reference, but some certain things are referenced by Chicago Manual, and some things are just internal preference. We do certain things in a certain way because we just prefer it that way. Recently, for example, we decided to stop italicizing words spoken in a language other than English, and that's something that we discussed internally, and not every publication or style book would abide by that. But if we're wanting to walk the walk, and not just talk the talk, we want to make sure we're not othering other languages, and that's a internal style that we use.
And that kind of goes back to also being as global as possible, because we're touching on perspectives and cultures from all around the world. Even though that Life and Time is in English, the perspectives and the people that we're highlighting, the journalists that we're trying to provide a voice to, they're in oftentimes not in English speaking countries. So we need to kind of honor and respect that. And the other thing I wanted to go back to Rebecca's question about balancing tone and facts and the journalist's voice. I think that's what makes like solutions-based journalism and objective journalism so important, is you kind of have to balance the facts and humanize it at the same time. And because if it was just fully facts or even just like potential solutions without humanizing the issue or humanizing what they're facing or even the solutions or who the people's who the voice of these people, you lose the attention. Like, we're highly cognizant about telling stories at the same time. I mean, if it's completely factual and it's just reading like a Wikipedia entry, why should we even exist? Like, might as well just go to Wikipedia and read about these the issues or these facts or whatever it is. But I think what makes us a little different is to provide that humanization of these stories and these issues, balanced with expert voice. Having these folks with PhDs to chime in on these potential issues to kind of provide that 30,000 foot level perspective. And we apply that structure with our documentary work as well, whether it's the Myron Kitchen or Boiling Point. Like, how do we balance the issue to be informed and to understand the facts, but what's going to get our attention and what's going to draw empathy is going to be the human stories. It's going to be the emotional connection that we could have with these people that are facing either these issues or these struggles. And that's also where we're going to get a little bit of hope. And I think that's important to kind of balance those two things. Rebecca, still with us?
I think the big thing that I want to touch on is kind of like amplifying diverse voices on their own subject and kind of finding community voices to tell their own stories. I think that's something we were very conscious of when we were sourcing Reboot, is finding these global contributors to tell stories about their own community, not having someone like in California write about Istanbul, or have, kind of like finding those voices. Can we just kind of touch on like our responsibility and like amplifying those voices around the world?
Yeah, because we're trying to connect the dots on how culture and global issues, they're all kind of connected to what we're facing and what they're facing. By providing a platform for these people around the world, we're now getting these other perspectives to open our minds and open our sort of discourse into how societies live in different parts of the world. And what we're going to notice is that we're more similar than not. And borders become an arbitrary sort of like ambiguous sort of concept at that point. And because we're now more isolated because of COVID and we're all kind of like, quarantined inside, we should be sharing perspectives and resources as much as possible across our borders, but we're not. That's the problem with media in this moment, is that we're not necessarily becoming more communal with our fellow global citizens. We're actually becoming far more isolated, and information within these countries and these societies are becoming much more insular, and that's a recipe for disaster, because now we're not learning from these other societies and these other countries of how they're facing certain issues that we could learn from. And from a journalist perspective, by able to share those resources and connect with these people, that only expands our Rolodex of potential expertise and perspectives to fully understand what we're covering. So it's really important to be providing this platform to these people around the world, these other journalists that are able to kind of contextualize what they're seeing and what they're facing in their communities, so we on this side could fully understand what we're up against, but also just sharing that sort of resources, and also just building that global community more than ever when we can, because like we're now doing this a webinar. The technology is already there, like we're able to connect with anybody around the globe, but mainstream news and mainstream media, it's still fully obsessed with its own sort of ecosystem, within its own borders, and that's a big problem. And we're not going to be able to solve global issues like climate change or even COVID without being able to share knowledge and open source our findings.
So kind of going, sorry, Jay, were you gonna say?
I agree. One of the biggest criticisms of journalism today, I think, is that it generally comes from New York or Los Angeles, and it only provides the perspective of New York or Los Angeles. And, you know, when you begin to cover stories globally, you are able to see that while there might be similar experiences across the world, there's also vastly different experiences across the world. And by providing a platform for people other than New Yorkers, for example, we're able to learn a lot more about the existence of humanity. And by interviewing people or having people write who are living in other places and actually living these topics we're talking about, actually going through these topics we're covering, you know, they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones with the real insight and experience. And I think it's super important to provide a platform for these voices so we can all, you know, as Americans, as people of planet Earth, so we can all learn more about the human experience and you know, hopefully grow a little more empathy towards one another too.
So we kind of touched on like community and like isolation during COVID, and I kind of wanted to transition to talking about our membership program, which is something that we're very proud of as a publication. If you're watching this and don't know about our membership program, we are a member-funded publication. Basically, that means we don't have any advertisers on Life Thyme. Our journalism is funded by readers, by members. I kind of want to say Antonio to kind of talk about like why that's important to us to be a member-funded like publication, like why that's something we're pursuing, the difficulties that come with that. Yeah, hand it off to Antonio.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in order to talk about what it means to be member-funded and why that's important, we first have to talk about how legacy and mainstream media is typically funded. There's no such thing as free news or free journalism. Even though we could go to certain websites and we don't have to pay for the news, it's someone is subsidizing that content. Someone is paying for it in one way or another. And the typical model in mainstream media is to have advertisers pay the publishing house or the publication to run ads, and the more clicks that a certain article gets, the more money the publisher is going to get because of the advertisers. So essentially, what happens is the reader becomes the product. Those eyeballs become the product, and now we become the product to advertisers instead of the journalism becoming the product, which should always be the product. We should be selling journalism to readers, and if that is compromised by advertising, subsidizing the journalism, you're gonna run into clickbait. You're gonna run into sensationalism because the publisher is gonna be wanting to get those clicks. You know, they want a sensationalized headline for you to click on that article, because that means more clicks, more advertising dollars. So that is how typically mainstream media is being paid for. But by going a member-funded route, we're held accountable to the readers because they're the ones directly funding the journalism. So the journalism becomes the product, and the quality, the standard of the quality also increases, because if we're publishing nothing but sensationalism or clickbait or articles that really have no sort of critical thinking or have no sort of substance, we run the risk that readers or members will not pay for their subscription, their membership, because they're not getting any value to it. So that forces us, as the journalist and the publisher, to always shoot for the highest quality form of journalism, because we're directly building a relationship with readers. And we also like to call it a membership versus a subscription, because to me a subscription is a transactional sort of relationship. Here's my money and give me access, and that's it. But a membership is a two-way street. We want to build a relationship with our readers, and we want to listen to them. We want to invite them to be a part of our process and the process of building our journalism. We're constantly looking for feedback from our members around the world in terms of like what they're seeing, what they're facing in their communities, so we could adjust our journalism based on the needs of our readers and our audience. Like we also get called out by certain members and readers to focus our attention in other regions or other areas that maybe we're not thinking about. So that relationship is critical with journalism, because at the end of the day, journalism should be for communities. It should be solving issues or highlighting or informing communities, and a membership is really the best sort of way to do that, because now we have a direct line to our readers and they could be communicating with us. So that is why we are extremely passionate about our membership program, and we have a link down below here if you're not a member, and it's mad cheap as well. So if you enjoy content like this and our stories from around the world, please consider becoming a member. I mean, it's like the cost of a cup of coffee nowadays.
It is actually maybe less than a coffee. It is less than a latte in Koreatown. I can guarantee that to you.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like, what are the challenges we've faced being member funded? Like, what was that process, and like transitioning from having advertisers on the site to being funded by members from like a business perspective?
It's extremely difficult, and we're still in the early stages of our membership program, and you don't really hear about membership programs with many publications or newsrooms. It's something that is kind of like a new model that's hopefully disrupting the media landscape. We see it with a lot of like nonprofit newsrooms though, supporting like NPR or even like PBS. But as far as like some of the challenges is that we almost have to convince and change the status quo of how people think about journalism, how they pay for media, or this perspective of like you don't want to pay for media. But I think there's still a lot of experimentation to be done, because we're also looking at communities that maybe they can't afford a membership or they can't afford a subscription. Like maybe it's more affordable to a certain economic group, but can we find ways where members subsidize the cost of the journalism to be accessible for other people? So that's something that we're constantly looking at and experimenting and seeing how can we provide access to people that really need it but might not have the financial means. So it's definitely a lot of different challenges, and I think we have to become comfortable to asking for support for our journalism and make the case of like why that is important versus just visiting a legacy sort of mainstream media outlet that doesn't charge the end user, but you're going to be sacrificing your privacy, you're going to be sacrificing the content, and you become a product of their advertising strategy. And that to me is, there's no relationship there between us and the newsroom, which is a completely missed opportunity. So we're still in the learning stages, and we hope that we can still continue to expand our membership program and make that case for being reader funded and why that's important.
I also just want to say, sorry, I just want to jump in really quick. We're talking a lot about members and memberships, which is obviously incredibly important, but something that I personally feel very proud of with Life Thyme is the internal community of contributors and journalists and the people that that do give a lot of time and effort to creating these stories, and we recognize how much. I don't know that I can ever really emphasize how much work goes into these stories, and that's not just on our part. That means the people that are out there, that are doing the interviews, that are coming home, they're transcribing. I mean, it's there's the amount of hours that goes into creating one of these stories is it's really unfathomable for anyone who's not done this work. And that's from the minute that we decide that we're gonna, that we're gonna do another paper, for us to sit down and talk about what that theme is gonna be, to, reaching out to contributors that have been maybe contributing for years, to new people, new pitches, working with them. The thing that I think that Gia and I especially are really focused on is making sure that writers have support in the process. And if that means, Antonio and I trying to go out and make connections with the right experts, or, whether it's the editing process alone is so incredibly, it can be very taxing, for both the contributor and on our team. And I just feel like we come out of it every time, and it's always a ton of work, but I'm always incredibly proud of the community. And one of the most rewarding things that I've seen happen in Life Thyme is for us to sort of be removed from it. We see relationships occurring between contributors, or between, contributors and their subjects, or they go on and they do other things together, or whatever that is. That to me has been the most gratifying part of this, because we're not just building a community of memberships, we're building a community within Life Thyme as well, the contributors, the writers, and us. And I mean, we have these, since COVID started, we've been having these occasional like contributor Zoom sessions, and it's just like a hangout. And we used to do it in person, which was great, and we can't anymore. But it's, I cannot emphasize or ever maybe express how gratifying that part of this has been. And I think that's really important in terms of when we talk about the structure of Life Thyme, because it is that membership structure that allows for us to do that.
Well, I want to get some audience questions. We've had some in the chat, we've had some sent in before. I want to start off with a question about pitching as a publicist right now during Corona. How do you what do you think how do you think publicists should be pitching publications right now while things are just, as insane as they currently are?
I can take a stab at this. The relationship that publishers and editors have with PR and publicists, it's an interesting dynamic, and one that we value, but at the same time, we're looking to cover certain issues that maybe PR and publicists are not thinking about, or their intention is to put their clients and promote and to shed light on the amazing things that their clients are doing. So they almost have like a threshold that they have to be overcoming by pitching these clients. But when the restaurant industry is in complete chaos and collapsing, it's very difficult, I would imagine very difficult to be pitching the stories of their clients, because everyone's facing hardships, right? Especially in the industry. And what I would say is focus more on who is actually changing how we live, how we think of things, who is actually pioneering or actively providing solutions to issues around our communities, whether it's a chef, a brand, a company, a founder, pioneer, whoever it is. We're not going to be covering stories about the luxury of eating or how things were 8 months ago. Our publication is not there to tell you where to go out to eat at 3 a.m, or where chefs are eating out after hours. that to us, that world is over. And COVID kind of like opened up this shed light on all these issues that are plaguing the food industry. And the food industry has always been such a fragile sort of shadow industry, and COVID just like put a spotlight and was the thing that just brought the house of cards down. So I could see how that's difficult for a publicist to be trying to pitch stories, but at the end of the day, like, chefs are always the sort of like the first responders, right? I mean, we've heard that from so many people, that they're the first ones to feed people when there's a crisis, you know. So there's always stories about resiliency, but I would say focus on this idea that we want people that are trying to solve issues, people that are trying to do something for the community. It goes back to being a solutions based um, sort of publication, because there's so much negativity and news is so bad, and that doesn't mean solutions based journalism is happy news. It's really just like shedding light on these issues, but what can we do about it? And that part is something that I think a publicist could really grab onto. Like, what is it that these restaurants or their clients are actually going over and beyond to do, or to change perspectives, or to change our status quo, and not just here's the latest takeout menu. Unfortunately, that's not us. You know, there's many other mainstream food media outlets that will focus on restaurant openings or the latest takeout menu that a restaurant has during COVID. That's just not us. Like, we're trying to solve or provide context to much deeper issues, and so we're just not the publication to be pitched for this new product that just came out, or this new menu that just got released, or so and so got a new award. To us, like, none of that matters. Like, what are they doing for their community? Now we're ready to talk.
At the end of the day, I think we want to learn something new too. And when I see a pitch that even within the pitch, I am learning something I didn't know or would have never thought of. And I can see that as being educational, not only to myself, but to our readers, that I'm interested in. And I think from the perspective of educating, that works from the pitch to the final read to the community that's built after. Within our process, like, even when Steph and I are editing, we're still asking more and more questions. We're still learning ourselves. If we can ask questions and we can help facilitate even further learning for our readers, I think that makes for a really good story. I want to walk away from the story having learned something completely new that I would have never ever thought of before. And I think we also see community built from that, because it provides for some really great discourse on social media and amongst our community afterwards as well.
We're almost like, it's almost like thesis based journalism. Every story should have a thesis. Like, what is the hypothesis of the journalist or the story? Like, what is that thing at a high level? Like, what is the thing that we're going to educate and inform? And if we're not able to identify the thesis, and hopefully by the end of the story we've provided a potential solution, or at least some sort of conclusion that readers could come away with, and hopefully change some sort of idea in their mind, or left them thinking about something differently, we've been able to do our job well. And I think journalists should be thinking about what is the thesis in their pitches, and also if publicists also want to reach out to us with certain pitches or ideas, what is the thing that they want to solve, or their clients, or their chefs, or their restaurants, like, what is that thesis? And if we're able to identify that and find a conclusion to that thesis, that's what makes a Life Thyme story.
Agreed.
Yeah, and also, I just want to also say on that point, we're using the term solutions-based journalism. That doesn't mean that we're giving a solution to every problem. It means that we're trying to find one, or we're at least making the attempt. You know, you're making two kinds of arguments with these stories, inductive or deductive. And you know, in a deductive argument, you come out with something concrete, and you're able to sort of point to something that is a solution, or that's being done. With inductive, it's more, this is a problem, these are some potential solutions, we don't have the concrete answers yet, but this is what's going on out there. And my hope with those stories is that somebody out there reads it and goes, okay, I can go support this person that needs this, or I have something that I can contribute to that, and it helps stimulate that ultimate solution. You know, it helps that solution come to fruition.
We had a question in the chat about what areas Life and Time has ventured into at the request of readers, but I kind of want to pose that at a different angle and kind of just talk about the different touch points that we have with our members and like the different feedback we're looking for. I'm kind of going to make a quick comment on this. We have a Discord for our members. If you're a member, you're not part of a Discord, please join. It's lots of fun. We are all in Discord. I'm in there way too many hours of the day. We read all the messages. We try to get back to everybody we can. Like we love talking to our members. Like we want to hear from like our members. We want to know what they're interested in. We want to know where they feel like we're not covering enough, what they want to learn more about.
It's like Slack.
We have 4 people. It's like Slack, but more fun maybe.
And that's extremely important to us, because I feel like, you know, Antonio and I are frequently sitting on a call pulling our hair out because we're like, well, what are the stories that we should be covering right now? What should we be talking about? Where should we be going? And that's great, but the two of us can't really get to the bottom of it. You know, It's really important for us to have the perspective from the community, whether that's contributors, whether that's readers, whether that's people on social media telling us where to go. We just can't come up with all of that. And so it's really important, and that platform has definitely, it's a new channel for us to communicate.
But to go back to providing an example of like which regions we've covered based on member input, one of my favorite is actually Kevin Vaughn, who is one of our new journalists in Argentina. He was originally a member. He still is. Thank you, Kevin. But I had posed a question into like one of our member newsletters of like, where should we be covering, or some question like that, or what can we do differently? And he responded by saying, cover more stories in Latin America and places outside of major cities in the U.S. And he actually called us out on saying like, a lot of your stories seem to be coming from California and New York. And we made that switch. We're like, okay. And that's the problem when most of these issues or stories are being assigned from just the editor's perspective. That's very dangerous, because the editors only have and know so much, and we're all sort of a product of our own sort of bubble. It should be the stories of journalists around the world should be pitching us and telling us like, where should we be covering? So he said this, and I noticed that he was also a journalist himself. So why don't you write something for us? And that's an example of like a member becoming a journalist for us and to cover stories from his community. And he's based in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And just that sort of line of feedback led us to having him cover a specific story in Buenos Aires based on how the community there was facing COVID. And we had a completely different perspective of how restaurants were approaching COVID during lockdowns and quarantine in Buenos Aires. And it started off by just saying like, hey, cover more stories in places like Argentina or Latin America, so let's do it. And I noticed that he's a journalist, so why don't you write something for us? So I think that sort of two-way relationship is really, really important. And not all members are going to be journalists either, but they could provide us and push us in the right direction. So that's one example of how we were listening, but we're constantly looking for pitches and doing call outs and asking our communities on social media or even our members to be guiding us to where we should be looking.
Just to kind of add to that a bit, we're all very accessible: social, Discord, Twitter, Instagram, any of our platforms. We're all reading the comments. Like, I'm checking them every day. Like, if there's something you want to see us cover, if there's an issue you see in your community that you feel like we are not talking about, if there's something that like you want to educate us about, you want us to like educate others about, like, message us, DM us, join our Discord, like put a comment on one of our photos. Like, we will read it. We will get back to you. We're here to learn as much as we want to help educate other people. I think that's something we all really share, is like we're very excited about learning about the world. We're very excited about like hearing these stories from around the globe. And we want to hear from you. Like, please comment, message it. Like, we're around.
Send us your grammar notes.
Yeah, send us your grammar notes. If you ever see a typo, it didn't come from Gia. It probably came from me. So don't blame her. I take full responsibility for that.
We're all human, though, you know? Even by the time we read and publish an article, like if it's in post, we've read it at least 10 times each. Sometimes some stuff slips through.
Mm-hmm.
We make some mistakes. We're all human, so it's all good.
Yeah, we are open to constructive criticism.
How many times have we published the?
I think that was only one. That was only one issue, I think.
It's a inside joke / actual policy where before we publish or send any issue to print, I searched for the and Antonio searches for the because you would be freaking surprised that the appears more often than you would think. It is, I don't know what it is, I don't know why this happens, but it's a totally common grammatical issue that sometimes words as in the get repeated. It's very strange.
Thankfully, there's an easy way to catch that.
Yeah, that one's a simple fix.
Yeah. After the fact, just make sure you have to run that sort of search. But when you're reading it, it's so easy to just like breeze through it. But yeah, before we go to publish, especially print, I do a search on the entire issue. The. Thankfully, I think it only slipped once. One issue.
I think with the amount of times we've all read Reboot, we could probably recite it at this point. We'd all pick a story and just recite Reboot.
All 35,000 words.
Oh, all 35,000 words.
I easily have dreamed some of those stories into existence in my subconscious in the middle of the night.
They're very real for all of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap it up here. It feels like a good point to call it a day on this one. Thank you everyone for coming. If you're not a member yet, I dropped the membership link in the chat a few minutes ago. I'll put it in there again. We really appreciate you spending your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world with us. Yeah, we're on social. If you want to give us a follow, we're at Life Thyme on pretty much everything. Yeah, hope to see you in our membership. Hope to see you. We're sending out a Reboot right now. Hopefully you guys have your copy. And thank you again. If you have any more questions, feel free. Like I said, message us. I'm in the DMs most days of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we missed any questions you have that come up after, anything you want the team to address? We're around, we're open. We'll get back to you. Thank you again. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.